Welcome to another episode of LIXIL Facets of Design. This is a podcast brought to you by LIXIL Global Design. I'm your host, Paul Flowers. As you know, this podcast, we release these each month, and each month we have somebody really interesting to take us through their creative journey. And this podcast was created to really share with the wider creative community, and that's what we're trying to do with the podcast. And many of the things we're doing at LIXIL, from the Pinterest account to our Instagram account, we're trying to create this sense of creative community and have substance and interesting things to discuss within the creative community that will hopefully inspire people, and we can share with one another our journeys and our experience. And I'm really excited that, we have some amazing guests on the podcast, but I'm really excited because I've been a fan of this individual designer for many, many years. And I'd like to welcome Dick Powell onto the podcast. So welcome, Dick.
Well, thank you for having me. That's really terrific. I've never been described like that as well. As a fan, fantastic.
Oh, we have. We're based today in the London studio, and many of the designers in our team were incredibly excited that you were coming in. We've all got the books ready, and we'll get onto the book and talk about some of that later. But we've all got, the books and how much you help support us in our early careers, just teaching us how to draw, how to understand how light hits different objects and space, and also just form and how to create that form in a sketch. But we're going to get into that in a deep way. First of all, maybe you could start with just a brief explanation. What we'd like to do is look through your initial interest in design and go all the way through your education. So maybe we can start there. What initially drew you to creativity?
Well, it's a fascinating, my history, my personal history. I went to a private school, and I always loved two things. One was art, and the other was things mechanical. And I grew up with a construction set called Meccano, where I could build structures and gearboxes and technical things. But I also loved art and drawing and so on. And the natural consequence of that would have been a career in architecture. Yeah. And architecture was the acceptable face of art to my father. Mm. So then I was going to do architecture at Cambridge. And during my final year at school, I stumbled into the library, and they subscribed to Design Magazine, which was published by the Design Council. And I opened that magazine and thought, oh my goodness, this is me. This has absolutely got everything. And fascinatingly or reassuringly at the time, I looked up courses in industrial design, as it was called. Yeah. And most of them only required 5 O-levels, and I already had 11. So I thought, oh, crikey, down tools, here we go. So I took myself off to a foundation course, which was a really fantastic year in every way, the opportunity to experiment with lots and lots of different disciplines. And then I did a tour of all the colleges doing industrial design. There were about 6 or 7 at the time. Yeah. And I settled on Manchester. I was a bit of a champagne socialist, a bit of smart upbringing, but really wanted to get down and dirty and read The Guardian. And I cared a lot about society and education and things. So I thought Manchester was a good place to go. And it turned out it was, and in those days when you did industrial design, they taught you a lot of things. It was a polytechnic by then. And so we had courses in injection molding and steel pressing and materials technology and so on, as well as the artistic side. Yeah. And then after that, someone said you should go to the Royal College of Art. Mm-hmm. Nobody at college said that. They had a system where they would select a student. They would nominate someone to apply to the Royal College of Art. And I said, they nominated someone else. And I said, look, I'm going to apply anyway, which really annoyed them. And I got in, and this guy didn't. Actually, he was a better designer than me. But I think that I was just, first of all, lucky, but also I was very good at communicating and talking about design and those sorts of things. And I think that tipped it for me. But back in those days, it's hard to believe now, but there were only 9 people in my year at the Royal College. Yeah. And it was I was in an environment, I can't speak highly enough about the Royal College, full of super talented people in every discipline. And you looked around you and thought, my God, these people are better than me. Everybody here is better than me. And fantastically inspiring way to start your career.
Yeah, I think today still the Royal College of Art's incredible. I know they're doing some work right now with the Design for Good, which is great. They've created a course on that. And RCA is I think is very well respected globally, actually, and still pushing out some students. I think the class sizes are slightly bigger now.
And as they're across the country, by the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, on that note, I guess, education. Well, I'll come back to education and your view on current education. But when you studied, because I see myself and say my generation as we always felt like trailblazers for industrial design, because I remember when I went to Northumbria that my family didn't even know what industrial design was. Thought it was, is that something to do with mechanics of cars or things? But if I just think of your generation, which is probably the one before mine, you were the true trailblazers, because there was nothing really other than a few magazines that were talking briefly about design. The wider public certainly didn't know what design was.
I don't think we were, as you describe, actually, because there were people before us, Ken Grange, for example,
okay, yeah.
and all the great American stylists.
Yeah.
We had the Design
Loewy,
Council,
I guess, yeah.
Raymond Loewy.
Yeah.
People, I mean, it wasn't widely understood by the public,
Yeah.
I think, and by, as you say, by our parents. But it was beginning through the work of the British Design Council, which, by the way, was fantastic at getting a broader understanding of design out into the society and into industry. And we were able to really jump on those coattails, I would say, and ride with it. But it did mean that almost every meeting you went into, you had to say what it was that you did. Like, what is this industrial design? And so in that sense, I suppose we were a little bit more pioneering, but it was pretty well established, honestly. Yeah.
Well, talking about the Design Council, I mean, they've done tremendous amounts for design. And I know where we recently connected, because I think I met you years ago at a plan event, one of those design events or something. But we recently connected through the Design Business Association. And we had Deborah Dorton on the podcast a couple of months ago, I guess. And I know you do some work. And when we met, actually, we were discussing about the opportunity in design and things. So I guess you're very active now in still this concept of design community.
I was, I made it an important part of me that I was very active in the whole design community. So we were one of the founders of the DBA, one of the 5 founding businesses of the DBA. And both Richard Seymour and I went out into the world, and I sat on the board of the Design Council, the DBA. I was chairman of D&AD for 10 years. We always did a lot in education. We'd go around colleges and talk to students about what we were doing and so on. And education's always been a big part of it. But being part of the wider community, as you're doing now with this podcast, I think is super important. Because there was a period when we first started where designers didn't talk to each other because they were fearful that you would steal their clients. That's how it was sort of in those days. But it's way better now, for sure.
Well, I love that concept of, you learn in your life. If there's 3 spans, you learn, you earn, and then you return. And I guess the designers now, which have a certain amount of experience, can start to contribute. And we often talk about this on the podcast. They can start to lecture at universities, like I know you do a lot with students, etc. They can give their time to different forums. Like you, I served on the board of the DBA, and I know, gifting some of your time sometimes to those organizations is really, really important, because it helps to amplify design.
A big deal now is schools, because back in the day when John Sorrell was chairman of the Design Council and they first introduced design and technology into schools as a required subject to the curriculum, that was absolutely transformative in a whole generation of kids growing up knowing what design and technology was all about. And that's a battle that we still fight today because it's been severely compromised in schools. Yeah. But it was ground-changing for this country that design and technology was available in schools.
Mm. Well, that's interesting, I guess, a nice gateway, a segue onto thinking about education today, because when I was educated in design, it was very hands-on, and you did learn lots, like you mentioned before. There were so many different facets even to learn them, from everything from learning about ergonomy and design theory and history of design and art and all those other elements, to actually the craft of design, being in the workshop, making your designs physically yourself before rapid prototyping and 3D printing and stuff. So you learnt all those elements, and they were very craft-based, hands-on. How do you think that's transitioned to nowadays? And when you look at education and how students are taught and how they're prepared for industry, how do you see education helping or hindering them nowadays? I
don't think it's anywhere near what it was. It's my own personal view. Back back in those days, the design education was based on the atelier system, the old Renaissance system, where the master would, or the lecturer, whoever it was, and you'd learn by example, and you'd learn by doing projects, and you'd learn by talking to your colleagues. But you were also lectured in all of the things that you needed in order to design new things.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit like saying to someone, paint a picture, but not telling them how to mix the color. You know, you need to know some basic things about how things are manufactured if you're going to be designing products. And I don't see that so much nowadays in students graduating from university. Often the question we'll ask at an interview is, you know, how's that going to work? And the answer is too often, the engineers will sort it out. Okay. You know, and that is not my idea of design. No. You know, for me, design is much more, as much about how it goes down the production line, how it's manufactured, as it is getting it in front of the consumer in the right way, and, you know, making beautiful things and desirable things and so on. But I think if you don't know how things are made, that's a very difficult thing to do, I think, to create great products. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think it's a real challenge, though, because if you're educational establishment, how do you educate designers to understand manufacturing, you know, challenges, material flow, all of those materials themselves, sustainability, history, now new tools like CAD, you know, and then there's often pressure on designers now to understand more about design management, you know, and when you leave, like yourself, we're going to get onto in a minute with Seymour Powell, but, you know, when you leave university, you're not really equipped with the tools to manage your own business and really understand how a business functions. But how does one fit all of those facets into a short education program?
I don't know. I'm not an educationalist. You know, when we did it, I did 7 years of further education. You know, that's a long time.
Yeah.
But the average graduate now is an embryo. You know, all the basic things are in place, but they need to grow and learn from, you know, and the old adage, never stop learning, is so true in our profession in design. You never stop learning about what's going on. But, you know, when you're dealing with class sizes, year sizes of 100, 150 students, you know, and staff shrinking like 3 members of staff, I generally find that across a spectrum of a year group of 100, you've got 10 at the top who are super talented and clearly going to make it. And you've got 10 or 15 who shouldn't even be there, and a middle ground that's got to fight really hard to forge a career in that industry, you know. But happily, I think, in terms of product design, a lot of students go off into other careers that are not necessarily as designers, but they'll go off and they'll go into manufacturing, they'll go into logistics, they'll go into any number of different things and form fantastic careers with that education that they've had in design.
Yeah, more problem solving, I guess.
Yes, a lot of problem solving.
I think that's, I mean, that's the nice thing about creativity in general. That's why we call this facet design. We try to have as many facets of creativity in, because one thing that you often see that connects them all is that all these individuals are very, very good about understanding a problem, whether that's an unarticulated problem from a consumer or if that's a business coming to you with a problem they think needs solving that you might have to challenge. You know, I think the creative education and creativity, I'm always preaching this. Creativity is so important, especially nowadays with things like AI coming in and new technologies, which are going to take away a lot of the automated jobs that relied on knowledge retention, not knowledge application. I think creativity is going to be really important across all subjects in the future.
Totally agree, creativity. I think the key word for me is vision. You know, I think the one thing designers... There are lots and lots of people who claim to be creative. You know, I always misquote George Orwell, or, you know, when people say all people can be creative, but some people are more creative than others. And you really do recognize the super creative people, and they do make a difference. But the one thing that people in our business bring to industry and to consumer markets is vision.
Yeah.
You know, what is that future going to be like, and why is it going to be like that? And visionary designers are people who can shape that future. They're not just being guided by what's there now, but they're shaping the future as it's going to be.
Okay, that's a nice area actually, because we often talk about this when we have this whole research process that we call pre-search, which we've trademarked actually, because we really wanted to move away from comparative research, because it just makes no sense. You're testing, it's just moronic. You're testing, and lots of big companies do that where they test their product against the competitors to see if it's better in whatever dynamic or whatever range they measure.
Well, I created a new word for that, research aside.
It really is.
The assassination of good ideas through research. Yes.
And that's exactly what it is. So we've kind of canned that. We've binned that because often also the insane thing, the ironic thing is that companies will be testing their product against a competitor's whilst their competitor is in the process of renewing theirs. So by the time they hit the market, they have no relevance to each other anyway. So we created this whole concept of pre-search so that we would look at many different aspects, from trends to ethnographic studies to all those latent need things as well. So not just articulated needs, but a really big important part of that is designers having that superpower, I call it, to be able to share with people a context that may not even exist yet. And I'll come on to this now because I think this is something that, I'm sure, and I know you're very humble about this and stuff, but the influence you've had on many designers, particularly myself and lots of people in my team, was, sharing your skills of drawing, which you can call it drawing, sketching, all those things, but they're forms of communication, which I've always found so powerful when you're in a room of people and executives and you're trying to share context that doesn't exist. You can lose that moment if you say, let me come back to you in 2 weeks with this thing that doesn't exist. Whereas if you have the ability to sketch and communicate in 3 dimensions quite quickly, you can really draw people in. So I've always been a huge advocate of sketching and visual communication.
It's a superpower.
It really is.
You know, if you can do it, not every designer is good at that. Let's be frank here, but it is a very, very fantastic superpower, not just for communicating with other people, but for communicating with yourself. When you're working up an idea and a form, and you draw it, and you immediately say, oh, well, this is wrong, that's wrong, and you turn the page and you do it again, and you turn the page and you do it again. And it's a kind of working method, but it's that, I come back to the word vision, it allows you to visualize something that doesn't yet exist. Yeah. When CAD first arrived on this in the world, my career took me through those changes. We always used to say that with a sketch, you can communicate 90% of what's going to be there and only know 5%. Yeah. But when you're doing CAD, you've got to define everything to get to the same position. So it's a fantastically economical way of developing things. And I'm sorry that to a great extent it's died out and not seen as critical by design colleges anymore. But to anybody who's watching this podcast, any young person, if you can draw, stay with it because it's a superpower. Yeah, it's something we really encourage when we take on new designers here and stuff. We often say, okay, take us through your process, take us through how you communicate. And I often want to see the initial sketches, the embryo of an idea and how they get from that initial idea to the thing they're showing me, the artifact, because that will tell me as well the span and speed at which they can share with the team as well, because we work very much as a part of a bigger team here, and the quicker and more open we are and we have the skills to share our ideas, the faster things move forward. Do you know what? When I used to interview people, this was before the days of CAD, we used to look at their portfolio, and then I'd take the portfolio away. Yeah. And I'd say to this poor young person, you know that computer, wonderful computer, you showed us all the alias renderings, give him a sketch pad, say, can you draw it for me, right? And it told me 2 things. So one, can they draw? Right? And usually the alias guy had done all the work, right? And 2, did they actually conceive it? Yeah. Because I could draw for you now the first product I ever designed, and I would get every detail exactly as it was. Yeah. Because it's kind of lodged in your brain through that process. Yeah. I think it's the same with physically making things. When we used to get in the shop, when you have to work out, it's really difficult to get this surface to transition, and you're trying to make that. You really have a firm understanding before you even go into CAD and things, how difficult or how the light will, or the ergonomy, how that thing will fit in your hand, how it will feel. So I used to love getting in the shop to do that. And like there are people who are good at drawing, there are people who are fantastic at hand modeling and making things. It's like 3-dimensional drawing. Absolutely. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, on that subject, I think it's a great time. So look, I'm not plugging your book because I couldn't. I don't think it's even on sale anymore.
It's out of print.
It's out of print. Okay,
yes.
It's out of print.
Yes.
But this is something that had a profound effect on myself and many of designers that I know personally as well, including designers in my team. But this was a phenomenal book, and I know when we last met, you told me a little bit, which I'd love you to share if that's okay, about the story how this came to pass and your sheer kind of dogged will to push this through into existence. If you could share that.
Yeah, it was great fun. I mean, when I left the Royal College of Art, I set up a business with some colleagues, and after 3 years, I moved out of that business for various reasons. And I had a house and a kid and a wife and everything, and I need to make some money. So I took myself off around all the UK colleges, giving demonstrations in how to do magic marker drawings and airbrush drawings and so on, and went around the entire UK, sponsored by Magic Marker. Right, who I said, you supply the materials and I'll take the fee from the lectureship. Yeah. And during that course of all those visits, people said, you should write a book about this, right? So I mocked up a book and I went to the Design Council and got some data about how many graduates there were every year, so what potential sales would be like and so on. And I took it to a publisher who published a similar sort of book. And they said, oh, we love it. It's fantastic. Let's, we'll think about it. And then they called me back in and said, look, it's a great idea for a book, but it's full color. It needs to be at least 100 pages or thereabouts. And you need to print 6,000 copies to make it viable. And we don't think we can sell 6,000 copies. So the answer is no. I said, stop. I said, what if I sold some copies, ahead of pre-sales? Would that change your mind, right? And they said, well, yeah, it might, So I literally left their offices and went to the offices of Magic Marker, who had distribution in art shops, by the way, and said, look, if I wrote this book using your equipment, would you buy some? And they said, Christ, yes, we'll buy 1,000 copies straight away. And I went straight back to the publisher the next day and said, look, I've managed to sell 1,000 copies in 24 hours. Why the hell can't you sell the rest? And so they did it. And then ultimately we sold 48,000 copies, so it was a good call. But when I look back at that time, I don't know how I did it. I mean, my wonderful wife is mostly to be thanked here because I spent a Sunday for a year doing that book, every single Sunday for a whole year. Wow. Just doing that book. And so she gave me the time and space to do that, but I didn't get to know my kids till after it was done, sort of thing,
So they're post,
But the downside of it was we got known as the people who were, good with their wrists. What did they used to call us? The wrist merchants, people who could draw rather than, stylists rather than serious design folk.
But it was an amazing book, and it was quite interesting because it wasn't just product. It was also it was product, but it was automotive. It had a bit of everything in. And so, obviously after your education and the book I guess that was before you set up Seymour Powell.
No, Seymour Powell, Rich and I were working together when we did that book.
Oh, okay.
When I did that book. But so after I left college, as I said, I set up this business with 3 other people, and I left that business and did this lecturing tour and everything. And then I'd known Richard Seymour because back in the day when you were setting up a business, you could support your fledgling business by lecturing in colleges. Yeah. A day a week. So I did a day a week at Central, a day a week at the Royal College of Art and so on. And I met Richard. We're both motorcyclists, and we'd ride up to St. Albans to teach on a foundation course. And we became friends mostly through motorcycling, and Richard is tremendously creative talent. I mean, I can't even, I could talk for hours about how fantastic he is as a creative genius. But we just decided that we'd both been burnt by our first businesses. So when I took a studio in Fulham, I said, look, if you ever get bored, where he was a creative director in an advertising agency, I said, if you ever get bored, then come and work here. And I went away on holiday, and when I came back, I found he'd moved in. So, and so we shared a common space, and we worked together for 2 years before we formed Seymour Powell. So independently, but under a common name.
Oh wow!
And then we set the business up officially in 1984, which is the year that was published.
Yeah. And from 1984, and it's still, as you know, I've been down to visit you very recently, but it's still very much alive now.
Still very much alive. I mean, Richard and I sold the business in 2007. Yeah. But that's because, like creative people, we weren't that great with pensions and things like that. And most of what we had for our futures lay in that business.
Yeah.
And we really needed to get some money out of it to have a pension and so on. So we sold it. But I continued then Richard stayed on too, but I stayed much longer. I continued to run it for 10 years and then handed it on to the next generation to run. And I think, having a business that the founders sell and have that business go on, doing well thereafter is, I think, a very tough thing to do for that business. But I think, the whole Seymour Powell team, just like everybody had this similar vision, the next generation were right there and with it, so it was able to carry on.
So I guess Seymour Powell will be your legacy. I mean, that very much is going on strong. And
it still is, and I'm still there. I work a day a week, and doing this sort of thing and, going to colleges and so on and working with schools. So I'm still involved in design, but Seymour Powell is still my calling card, really. And it's got a worldwide reputation, and the quality issue has always been super critical. But I remember once, being described by a very, very famous British designer as those people who design the stuff in the Argos catalogue. Right? Do you know what? I love that, because that's exactly what we were doing. We were designing things that your mum could buy, not, highfalutin chairs that fall over and kettles that burn your hand. This was all about real things.
Well, I loved Argos as for people who, international people. Argos was, it was this kind of unique store in the UK where it had this amazing catalogue and you could buy things. But what made it very, very different was they had a 16-day money-back guarantee. So industrial designers, when we had started a project, we would go down to Argos, buy 3 or 4 products that we could just test, and then we would return them at the end.
Did you? We never did that.
Oh, we did that. Yeah, they were live. They were live things that we could get our hands on and look at, and measure, and then put them back all perfect back in the box. And they would honour their 16-day money.
But it was a great reference, that book. Yeah. What was around? What was Philips doing? Yeah. What were all these great brands doing in different fields of endeavour? I mean, it was a great...
It was pre-internet, I guess. It was really a nice way to do research. So let's talk about Seymour Powell, because Seymour Powell is I guess responsible for some prolific design innovations, and maybe we could start with just talking about one or two. I mean, the Tefal. You basically created the cordless kettle that we all take for granted nowadays, that you see everywhere in everybody's home.
It's very interesting, but if you ask AI who created the world's first cordless kettle, it tells you that it was Russell Hobbs.
Oh, really?
Not us. Right? And I can tell them that is wrong, right?
And technically, I guess with Tefal, they had a cordless iron before.
That's
so I guess they probably
right.
created the whole cordless idea probably before Russell Hobbs even.
Well, you can't patent the idea of a cordless kettle. You can patent this or that way of achieving a cordless kettle. And they had, as you rightly say, they had a cordless iron. And so bringing that into the world of a kettle was an obvious thing to do. And interestingly, it solved a problem most people didn't even realise they had. Because we were all very happy pulling the plug out the back of a kettle and refilling it. And of course, all kettles were cordless before that.
And, that in itself is it's quite funny. When I talk to people about milk carts, like my daughters, I talk about, the milk used to be delivered on an electric car. And the first car was an electric car, and now we've gone back. And it's a bit like the cordless kettle. It was always cordless on the stove, but obviously became corded with electricity. But just to touch on what you just said there about people didn't even know they needed it until you presented it. So that really is one of those kind of...
It would have been interesting to research it at the time, because I'm quite sure that people would say, no, it's fine, pull the plug out, fill it up, plug it back in. But it's where ethnographic research would have really revealed some things about what happened to that cord when it was left lying around on the wet area and that sort of thing. But it was a natural thing to do, and people have always, it's an obvious thing really not to have a cord if you can achieve it. But the technical difficulties then were quite considerable, because you get arcing when people put the kettle back on its base when it's still live. So we had to have a very complicated system to disengage it, which people did away with later by silver plating the contacts, so that you didn't get that arcing. But it gave us a tremendous opportunity to get involved with the wonderful French brand Tefal, that we worked with them for 35 years, longer actually, and survived endless management changes and all the rest of it. Because what we brought to that company was always innovation, I've always been everything we've striven to do in our life has been trying to be innovative in everything. And the reason for that is that innovation gives our clients an edge. Even if it's just something to talk about when you communicate these days through social media, whatever, about what it is you're doing. To have something that sales and marketing people can talk about is important. But to deliver innovation that really makes a difference to people's lives, I think that is fantastic. And I think we should all always aspire to be innovative and change the world.
Yeah, and that's something very much I think that you've been consistent to Seymour Power in delivering, is not just technology for technology's sake, but actually a true human benefit at the end, whether that's an ergonomic one, whether that's a process benefit. I think that's been quite obvious from the portfolio.
All of those things, yeah. And sometimes it's hard. In some domains, innovation is really hard. I mean, your own domain in the bathroom, we've done a lot of work in the bathroom, but here in the UK, back in the day, it was dominated by the bathroom distribution business, by builders, merchants, and so on. And I remember going to give a presentation at a great manufacturer of bathroom products, right? And we had all our foam models of loos and all the rest of it. And the chief engineer there, this is way, way back, he said to us, "You come up here with your Banray glasses and in your Audi TT, you think you can bloody change the world, Yeah, that's what we're trying to do, yeah.
That's the point, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a lot of, in some industries, it's quite hard to be innovative and different,
Yeah.
I mean, coming back to your bathroom, the whole bathroom, your bathroom is in your house for decades. It's not like something that you would change every 2 or 3 years, so it does need some permanence. But there was a real lack of vision in that industry.
Yeah, there's a real change. I mean, obviously, I started working with the Grower brand in 2005, and then that became part of LIXIL. And one of the interesting things with LIXIL acquiring Grower was the access to some of the Japanese technologies, which is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
Some of the valve technologies, the spa toilets, the different things that we've been able to bring in across all of our brand portfolio. That access to technology with great design and great engineering and quality, it's like the perfect combination. So that in turn is leading to some really interesting innovations now in bathroom, in health and well-being. And
it's changed a lot, your industry. I mean, and actually your company, Grower, we used to look aspiring, really inspired by what Grower were doing. And we just wish that our clients would have that sort of vision and consistency to what they were doing.
That's really nice to say. I just want to jump onto another, because I'm fascinated. So it's a personal question as well, because I collect watches. We always talk about this on the podcast. I'm obsessed with watches. I love watches. I love everything about them, and they're a very intricate, very personal product that you have in your life. And I know you've had an amazing relationship with Casio over the years and designing some of their incredible watches, including, I think you actually are responsible for inventing the category of the baby G-Shock.
That's right.
Yeah. So
That's right.
Maybe if you could tell us a little bit.
Well, we did that.
That's fascinating.
We created the range of baby G watches, and actually, we can't claim complete credit for this. Toshi Ando, who was head of design in Casio, and I said to Toshi, why don't we let's go and have a think about that. Let's do some work and research what young women are doing in the world of fashion in particular. And so around London, we sent our foresight team out around London to film, photograph, and talk to young women, mostly teenage women. And it was during a fashion era of grunge, and some of these girls were wearing giant G-Shock watches wrapped around their clothes, because they were too big for the female wrist. And Toshi and I thought this was super interesting to try and make a reduced scale G-Shock watch, right? And Toshi said, well, that's a problem because, without the bulk and size of the protective material, it won't pass the G-Shock test. Yeah. So he came up with the idea of putting the little bits of bent wire across the face with the rubber bumpers on, which then protect the face in the G-Shock tests. So that's how they arrived, right?
Wow. Okay.
And so then we put all that together and produced 4 watches, the first 4 baby G watches. But the most fascinating part of the story, and he's a very clever guy, Toshi, he got the Spice Girls, long before they were really famous, right, he paid them some money for some merchandising. They would wear these watches. And that was a masterstroke because they were wearing baby G watches. Yeah. And then the month that they were scheduled to all be released, there was a screw up in production, and they were only able to make 1,000 pieces instead of what was planned. And they had all this PR, all the Spice Girls, all the marketing, all the magazines. Everyone was screaming for them, but they couldn't get them. And it caused the kind of frenzy in the world, in Japan, people trying to get these, and it just pushed them well beyond. They were selling for like 2-3 times the price.
Wow.
Because they were in short supply. And that created the Baby G brand. And it went on to be Casio's second biggest brand after G-Shock. So, but we had a lot of fun designing watches. I must tell you a really funny story about, we often talk in design about having a big vision.
Yeah.
But also focusing on the detail, and to create great things, you've got to pull back and have a big vision, and you've got to focus in and get absolutely everything right. And I remember being in Casio talking to one of their design engineers, and he had a watch, right? And he said to me, Dick-san, do you think this radius should be 0.5 of a millimeter or 0.75 of a millimeter, right? So this is an obsession with the detail at the expense of the big vision, because in the grand scheme of things, 0.75, 0.5 doesn't really make a big deal.
To the human eye,
right. But you do find with young designers nowadays focusing too much on the detail, losing sight of the big vision.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot just working on a screen. They'll create a great design and then they'll go and make a model of it and it'll be too small, because they've lost sight of the scale of it, So,
because they're looking directly.
So that we call it zooming in and out, is so super important.
Yeah. Yeah, but just one last question about, because I read somewhere, maybe it's conspiracy theories, but the name Baby G, was that anything to do with the Spice Girls' names?
Yes, absolutely.
Because
Not a lot of people
I've
know
never heard.
I mean, apart from it being a smaller G-Shock watch.
Yeah.
Toshi, I think, had a really sweet spot for Baby Spice, and that's why he called it Baby G.
No, really? Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just Baby G-Shock, it was actually Baby Spice, Baby
I think
G.
So, yes.
Incredible.
I think he did tell me that. It's a long time ago.
Well, that's a beautiful story in itself, isn't it? It's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So obviously, we've spoken about Tefal, we've spoken about Casio, very different scale. Now on to something be amazing, I'm sure people would love to hear about, at a completely different scale, would be the work you've done for Virgin Galactic.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm fascinated by that, because as we've discussed in the past, I'm fascinated by this concept of space travel could be obtainable in my lifetime at least. So it's a really exciting time.
When I was a kid, growing up, sort of age 7, 8, 9, there was a magazine, a comic called Eagle, which starred a character called Dan Dare, pilot of the future, and it was all about space travel. And it combined that future, with the idea of space. I loved it, and I dreamed of doing that. And I grew up with Richard Branson. So I've known Richard since I was like 2 or 3 years old. And my brother founded Virgin Records with Richard. Back in the day.
Amazing.
And we've sort of stayed loosely in touch, and sometimes he wants something design related, he'll give me a call. But we got roped in there very early on in the days of Virgin Galactic, when they were selling a dream, but they didn't have a lot to sell really. And they said to us, can you build a mock-up? Can you design and build a mock-up of the interior of the spaceship? We want to take it to this show in New York. And we said, well, yeah, we can, but, how much money have you got? And they clearly didn't have enough money to build a full-size mock-up of a spaceship. So we said, well, we'll make an animation. It was quite early days of animation, actually. We had some super talented people in the office who could do really comprehensive animation. And we created an animation of the entire astronaut experience. And that became their chief marketing tool for the next 10 years.
Oh, so the first thing to do, I guess, is to recruit the astronauts that would...
That's right. So they're selling tickets for $250,000 per person. Yeah. And they were signing people up to do this. Yeah. And this was their prime marketing tool. And we were actually working under the constraints of what's called the ITAR regulations, that mean you can't export space technology out of the United States. So we had to guess a lot of it. We knew there was a mothership, and so we were able to put that all together for them and did that. And then many years later, over 10 years later, they came back, and they'd had a few, I don't know if you know the history, but they'd had a few setbacks, and they rang up and said, look, we're nearing, they'd made a few flights, and they were doing the final interior, and they said, look, we need your help because this is not working. Can you come and have a look? And so they had a designer, and we went out there, and the number one problem they had was seatbelts. because you can't use car type inertia reel belts because there's no gravity.
Zero gravity,
right? They don't work, right?
Not possible, I guess.
And the belts in zero gravity, they do what we call kelp, like seaweed. They just float around like that, you know. And a couple of our team went for a ride in the Vomit Comet, where they fly parabolas to experience weightlessness, to see what the issues were and how they could be solved. And we went to the local DIY store out there in the Mojave Desert and bought some elastic and string and glue and all that, and built a new seatbelt system for them on the spot, right? And they said, "This is great. We need more of this." So then we got engaged to do the whole spaceship interior. Which, when you think we talk about ergonomics, well, you've got ergonomy problems of trying to accommodate a 5th percentile Asian lady and a 95th percentile American man, right? You are dealing with enormous proportional differences. Yeah. And so making a seat system that could be created flexibly enough to allow different people to fly in it. It had to recline as well, so you were upright on the way up, sitting upright, but more reclining on the way down because of the high gravity loads and so on. But just huge fun, I mean, you dream of going to space, I mean, I keep saying to them, look, if you have any spare tickets or someone doesn't show up, give us a shout,
Last minute on call.
Yeah.
But is that one of the most interesting or exciting projects you've ever worked on? Or?
Definitely. But people often say to me, what's the favorite things you've ever designed? But mostly it's stuff that I could point to in the high street and say to my mum, we did that.
Yeah.
That's what really gets me going mostly. But things like the spaceship are just like things you dream of. And, they are such fun to do that, where you can, and we've designed a lot of motorcycles in our times, and when you can actually get on and ride the thing that you've designed.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, in all those areas where you can actually, having your own taps in your house, and every time you use it, you think, we did that right. Those are the things that really get me excited, I think, the things where you can make a difference.
Yeah, on scale as well. I mean, that's why we become industrial designers, right? It's not art per se. It's really, it's a commercial activity. You're trying to change the lives of as many people for the better as you can. And that's one of the things I think, when I speak to industrial designers, that gets them so excited is that they can provide a better experience for so many people on such a scale. Their work is amplified, and we always talk about this on a podcast that, we, in our design team that we have in 8 studios around the world, we produce designs that are used by over 1 billion people every single day. And that makes us feel incredibly.
It's a responsibility too.
Huge responsibility, and that actually leads me on to a question I have to you about, with all the work that you've done over the time. Obviously, you would have seen that progression, that migration for the better in terms of companies wanting to be more sustainable. But how has that affected kind of, let's say, business that you've developed? In terms of how does sustainability prioritize, and how have you seen that change over the years?
Well, let me take a step back. Design is about making things better, fundamentally. It's a really, really important point, because kids growing up today think it's all about making things look sexy and cool, right? But for me, it's about making things look better for people, as we've discussed, better too for business. This isn't art that we're doing, it's a commercial act, and better too for the world, right? So those 3 things are really, really super important, and they're super important for design. Over our 40-year history, in our first 30 years, let's say, we weren't particularly caring about the world. Nobody was, But certainly for the last 10 or 15 years, that's become, in a client brief, it's gone from the last line of the bottom of the page up to the first line of the first page. But I remember when, for example, we did a lot of work in kitchen appliances, as we talked about, and EU regulations changed and said that manufacturers have to take back products that were brought back to them for recycling. They have an obligation to take it back. And instead of making their products easier to disassemble and all the rest of it, they just paid another company more money to take that product and disassemble it, right? And so that costs more money, so that gets passed on to the consumer, and the end result is that it costs the consumer more because of that, rather than changing the culture of the company. But subsequently, the culture of companies has changed, and is changing.
We have a saying that we're the designers are the objective barometer in the organization, and that means also keeping ourselves aligned with consumer needs And we often talk about this. So what we do in design as well, we ensure that the company is creating the right stuff. Yeah, because not just stuff based on our assets, but the stuff that consumers really want. That keeps us relevant, popular, and of course leads to hopefully better business when you work in that way. But it's also, I guess, it's a huge responsibility that we ensure as creatives that we're the barometer of all things good, for example, ensuring that what we design, there is an ecosystem behind that looks beyond the sell and the transaction to what happens. And what we can do more and more now is actually preempt that. We can look at using materials in a certain way. We can look at how they're disassembled. We can look at how those materials could be repurposed. There are so many more opportunities now through different technologies for us to do that. But
I think in addition to that, coming back to your world of the bathroom, it's not just the end user that's having to use the product, but it's also the installer, for example, and the distribution of that product.
Yeah.
And we created what we called back in the day the first digital shower, which was electronically controlled, temperature control and flow control, which lived in a wall space or an attic space, and therefore, but the driver of that was not necessarily to make things better for the consumer, but to make things better for the installer, because he could install a bathroom without retiling it, and therefore it was an attractive option for him or her installing the bathroom. It was easier to do, and so the knock-on benefits of a single interesting thought were really super important, and that it changed for everybody, not just for the user, not just for the manufacturing company, but for the installers and distributors and everything.
Yeah, I think that's a nice thing when you have that objective view and the wider view. You start to look at the stakeholders and all the materials and usage. That might be in transportation. We've done some projects where we simply changed the angle of the shower head, and we could reduce the packaging by 50% to fit twice as many on a truck.
Well, you used to work for Philips, didn't you?
I did, yeah. So
and loading TVs onto how many TVs can you get in a container?
Absolutely. It was quite an important thing. Back in the days of cathode ray tubes, trying to squeeze
there
those
were
things.
People whose entire job was to get as many in as possible.
I can remember designing the back covers of TVs with the draft angles to get them off the tool, but also how do they stack when they're when they're in the factories being held as inventory and stuff. Yeah, we used to have to think about all those things.
So some of those smaller things, great challenges, like we did, like plastic containers for storing food for a manufacturer, and they you'd think, well, that's quite straightforward, it's quite simple, but they have to nest, and they have to stack, and they have to what they call Russian doll. Put one inside the other, and you put those three requirements together. Oh my God,
that's a
it
challenge.
Really does your mind in. Never mind how it looks.
Yeah, I did some work with I think it was with Samsonite back in the day when I was doing an internship at Feather Miles Group. FM
God,
design.
yeah.
So
Richard
I was
Miles,
there. I was there
Ben
with
Feather.
Richard and
Were
Ben.
you?
Yeah,
Crikey.
so I was there, working for. That was an amazing period. I worked under with two designers. One was Ian Ferris and John Tree, that went on to work with Jasper Morrison now. So he's a brilliant designer. John's amazing. Ian was incredible. But at that time, we were doing stuff for companies like Samsonite, and you're right, it was all about that thing. It was about. Also, they pioneered really gas injection molding and stuff, and it was just really interesting. Trying to get anything to do with storable items or luggage or anything where you're looking at those elements coming together. It's really challenging, very different to solid product, which is interesting. So amazing. So done all those things. I just wanted to ask you two things really on different sides, which is about creating a brief. How do you work? Because lots of times when we're discussing with designers, we talk about how do you create the perfect brief. Like I said, we do pre-search now, so we do so much before we start. Because what I like to do is, gather as much information as possible. We do this now in a way where we gather all that information, and we'll do pre-workshops just to create the brief with the business. And that's really helpful for several reasons. First of all, it lines everybody in a direction. So when you start the project, everybody's going in the same direction. So we tend to be more efficient in that process. But it's much more important that in the beginning you're aligned on all of the facets of those elements, insights, trends. Like I said, new context. So that's why we do all that pre-search stuff, and we put that into the brief at the beginning. Because what often happens, you probably had this in consultancy, that you're given a brief and actually what the company's asking for isn't probably what you've ended up giving them. So I'd just like to get your view really on how do you create the brief, and how have you worked with companies over the year to change the brief or coerce them into going the right way, in your opinion?
Well, it's a precept at Seymour Powell that a brief is a collection of client prejudice, typically. I always tell young people, I say, whatever the brief, read the brief, put it in your drawer, and do not look at it again until you've nearly finished, and take it out and see how what you've done squares up to what you've been asked to do.
Yeah.
Because if you can't use a brief as a systematic building methodology for getting a solution, it doesn't work, right? And you're so right in that by the time you put a really, really good brief together, you've pretty much got a vision in mind of what should come out of that. So all the work you do, looking around at the market, talking to people, doing observational research and so on, feeds into that process of creating a brief. But hidden behind that is a vision of where you think that should end up. I think if you just try and write a cold brief that's just a series of words that sum up an objective, I don't think it really works. It's important to have that as a benchmark against which to measure what you do. But the most important thing is to somehow frame a vision of what you're trying to achieve and where you're intending to go. And then that gets the whole business behind what you're trying to do. And I've had so many stories I could tell you about coming in, answering the brief. We always had it's an adage at Seymour Powell. We'd answer the brief, and then we'd say, but you could have this.
Yeah.
This is what you've asked for. And we'd always honour the brief, always do that exactly. And say, so we take the first cordless kettle, for example. They gave us an element that we had to use, and we did 3 mock-ups of that element and said, that's what you've asked for, but if we change the element, you can have this, right? It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's obvious that was the thing to do, but the business didn't, it was written in the brief in a different form. The number of times that we've done that and put something, it's a bit like Steve Jobs and One More Thing, like you do what you're asked for. And by the way, why don't you try that?
And I think that's a really powerful way to work. We often do that. But now, I mean, in the beginning, if I'm honest, we worked a lot like that. So we would always say, answer the brief, because then there's no conflict. You give somebody, and they're very happy with what they're given. So you say, that's amazing, right? And everybody's really happy. But then you show them something that might be out of context, something better in whatever way that might have to stretch the assets they have in place as a company or whatever it is. But you show them that amazing thing, and then you give them the opportunity to see what great looks like, not just good.
The difference between could and should.
Yeah.
You should do this, but you could do that.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's really, I guess we have the luxury of in-house because we work so closely with our engineering teams and marketing teams and the business, that now with this concept of pre-search, we're working much, much more on, we're doing that at the beginning. We're discussing those things. We're working with those things. But it all kind of joins up, because that comes back to the discussion we had about, as designers, being able to visualize that new context very quickly. It really enables you to move that conversation on. Like you said, with having 5% of the knowledge, you could probably represent the idea, 80, 90% just from a sketch. So it's really powerful if you can.
The pre-search thing, we have a team called Foresight, which does everything ahead of a brief, effectively. Yeah. And Foresight is employed by outside companies who are doing exactly what you just outlined, effectively, but they don't have the time in-house to do it. And they will ask Foresight, go out and scope this whole area and help that to create the brief.
Yeah, I love working for a Japanese company. I've learned many, many things over the years. But one of the things I learned was this concept of go slow to go fast. Really put in the work at the beginning, and then things will speed up overall. And that might be that you work longer on your toilets and ceramic work in the beginning, but later you'll get better yield rates because you really iron out all of those problems before you get to mass production. But you have done a number of things. And one of the huge things you did, at least in the UK, I think it was via Channel 4 at the time, was you created the first. And it was very inspiring. I think I graduated in 98. I think that was the year probably that came out.
It is actually.
Was it 98? And you created a television series about design. So finally somebody was creating a TV series that would take to the wider public, that could help explain the job I was about to get. So thank you for that. But maybe you could share with us what that TV series was about and how that came to pass. How did you go from being a designer to creating a television series with Channel 4?
Oh, it was such fun, that. It was, Rich and I always we weren't afraid of PR. We really enjoyed the PR, and we thought we needed to get design onto television because we'd kind of done the newspaper thing and the magazines and all the rest of it. And we thought this would be, and so we approached the BBC and we approached a few other people, but the BBC in particular said, no, this is the sort of thing that's handled by the South Bank show. It was, it was in the culture and arts stream. It wasn't sort of interesting. But Channel 4 had done a series with a guy called John Harvey Jones, which was where he would go into companies and advise them. He was the ex-CEO of a big company. And we thought this was like, his was, I think, the first reality show. We thought that would be a really interesting thing to do. So we eventually, none of the TV companies were interested, actually. So we went to a private production company who had made programs for a strand called, on Channel 4 called Equinox, which was a science strand. They did wonderful programs. And we said, look, why don't we make a program about where you follow what's going on in our studio, and it'll be fantastic and interesting. And they did that, and they called it Designing Dream Machines, where we followed the creation of a kettle and food processor, a motorcycle, and scooter for India. And it was literally a fly-on-the-wall documentary. It took a year to make. Channel 4 said, that's great, fits in Equinox jolly well, thank you very much, guys. And then we thought, well, now what? And Channel 4, they're not ideas people. They're a production company, they're a TV company. So we found another production company, and we said, we want to do this kind of John Harvey Jones type thing for design. And we'd like to make a series, and they said, what ideas? And the first idea we gave to the production company was we called it Body Machines.
Oh, okay.
Right, so it was all about shoes, sports shoes, headgear, all of that, body machines. And part of that was a ladies' bra for sports people, right? And we said, we'll make this, we'll do one program. And they sold the idea to Channel 4, this Body Machines thing. And so we were going to do just one program, right? And being Channel 4, it quickly came down to just being about the ladies' bra.
Okay.
And our research, in part of this program, we learned so much about the bra that we didn't know, and most people don't know, but mainly most women don't have any problem wearing a bra, but women with bigger busts do have a problem wearing a bra. We had an analysis done by a structural engineering company that showed us all the issues. And when we showed Channel 4 the first rough cuts of this, they said, this is fantastic. This is amazing.
Great TV.
This is great. This is Channel 4 all over. So they immediately authorized 2 more programs. And so the first series was 3 programs, one about an electric car and one about, what was the third one about? I can't remember. And they were a huge success. So happily for us, the bra program went out on the same night as a European Cup semi-final football match, England versus Germany. And so they could look at their numbers on set-top boxes, and see that the audience all the football lot switched over to Channel 4 to watch the bra program. And suddenly the audience was 4.5 million for our bra program. Wow. So they thought, let's, and the other two were good. And then we made another series of 6. And this was really taking the whole question of design and bringing it into the public domain and saying, there are people out here who do this, for a living, and this is how it works, and this is... But it was, every program was like, jumping off the side of a building, not knowing if you got a parachute on, because you had to
had to deliver.
You had to come up with an idea,
Oh my goodness.
And running a business. And we were only on the program by virtue of the fact that our day job, that's what we did as a day job.
Yeah.
There came a moment where they said, Channel 4 said, we want to go on with this. And we had to decide, do we want to be TV presenters or do we want to be designers? And I could have elected to be a TV presenter. I was quite entranced by the idea, to be honest. I like the kind of being recognised in petrol stations and that sort of thing. But it was obvious that we had to go back to doing what we were doing, really, because it was too demanding to make TV programmes and run a business at the same time.
Yeah, I guess deliver the product, the real thing.
Yeah, I mean, oh my God. But a lot gets codded up for television. Once you've made television programmes and then you watch some of these reality things, you realise how much is codded up for TV.
Yeah, of course.
But we really did it. We actually had workshops and mock-ups and things working, to demonstrate the principles of it. And the bra went into production,
That's incredible. And it was very successul, wasn't it?
For a year, yeah, it was fantastically successful. Yeah.
But that had an immense effect on just spreading the word about design.
I think it did, it did bring design into the public consciousness in a way much more effectively than like 30 years of design council work had managed to achieve, because it was so immediate for people. They could get it straight away, and it's the power of media.
And what was it called in it? Was it called Design on Your?
First three were called Designs on Your, Designs on Your Bra, Designs on Your Car, Designs on Your Loo. That was the other one. Yeah, it was about a toilet. Yeah. And then the others were called, we changed the name to Better by Design for the other 6.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was a follow-up program about how the bra went into production.
Wow. Now, just the question, a general question, but with all of your experience, all over the years, working with so many different, and phenomenal clients, you've worked with pretty much all the big names in electronics as well. What makes a good client from your side?
A good client is one you have a long relationship with. I mean, I have found personally that the companies where we worked with them for 5, 10, 20 years, where you have an understanding, their engineering team, their capabilities, their CEO, you as an in-house guy, all those people. Yeah. That relationship is so much easier when you have that long-term respect, and the CEO sees the value that you have, and the R&D and engineering team see the value and the importance of design. Yeah. And therefore, everything segues together in a coherent way. It doesn't work when you just come in, do something, wave a magic wand and leave again, because it just leaves everybody bewildered, by what it is. So the long relationship, I think, is what makes the best client. Vision, again, I come back to that word, clients that have a vision for the future and are not just concerned with next year's model, but actually are looking further and want to change the world. They want to, the people who really want to change the world. Steve Jobs was like that. I met him a couple of times. Amazing. And, talk about long-term vision and view, about and what was important and sticking to it. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. We had Sean Carney on here. He's coming out in a podcast that he done, and when he worked at HP, he had a really interesting story about Steve Jobs. That again, Steve Jobs came in and told HP they had to change and produce a better kind of product to interface with their products, and put them under huge pressure. But as a result, they came out with a phenomenal brief. So I guess having a visionary leader helps, and we often talk about this as well. We're incredibly fortunate in our organization that design is elevated to an influential level, and it's heavily sponsored by the CEO and who really sees the value that design can add. In so many areas, the value in all of those areas, in fact, which are consumer touch points, whether that's external areas like when they're doing their research, digital interfacing, all the way down to, I talk about. All of these elements are very important, but they're the courtship. The marriage is when you take the product home and live with that. The marriage is also part of the service, and if something does go wrong, how do we treat people? How do we interact with them? And design can add tremendous values to all of those consumer touch points. So we're very fortunate, and like you say, having that kind of rapport and connection means that you can do something that goes beyond a singular product. You can affect the culture of the organization, which has true value, I think, true meaning.
Definitely true. Yeah.
And designers have that ability. So how do you approach and how do you sell in, let's say, creativity to an organization that perhaps isn't particularly creative? Have you ever had a client or a particular experience where you've thought to yourself, gosh, they're not going to interface with creativity in the normal way you approach things? Have you ever had to adapt in any way?
The most influential way is to actually be creative on the spot, actually talk about their product, their issue on the spot, and talk about a future they could have and outline that future. When you talk to a company that's perhaps really thinking about design for the first time, and you talk about their future and the future of their product, and as you say, pick up a pen and start thinking about, particularly, we talk a lot about product architecture, so how it's constructed inside, quite complex products like spaceships and everything else, being able to talk about the internal architecture of how something is conceived and built. That really that's really understood by the engineering and R&D team.
Amazing. Is there one piece of advice or advice you would give to young designers that will be starting their careers, leaving university, looking for employment, starting their careers, and with your vast array of experience, of all the years, is there any advice you would give to them?
In a difficult world for them now, I would always say, make yourself a god at one thing, right? By that I mean, like, I made myself a god at drawing and rendering and sketching and all of that. And that gave me an in to lots and lots of different things. And I say to young people today, like, if you're going to sit down in front of an Alias or Pro E or Photoshop or whatever the tool is, make yourself the best there is at that. And you will get a job, right? There are so many generalists who are trying to, because college brings you up to be a generalist, because you've got to be good at ergonomy and you've got to be good at problem solving and everything else. But on top of that, make yourself good at really, really one thing and be the go-to person for that.
Yeah. That's really interesting. We had a guest here from Foster's and Partners, Naren Sagu, and I don't know if you've ever seen his work, but he's just the most incredible, I don't know if artist is the right word, but illustrator artist of architecture. I mean, just the most amazing work.
I'd love to see that.
Share some of his work. But we had him on a few months ago, and he was really insightful and really spoke about that. It's something he's been incredibly passionate about, drawing every single day, all of his life, and as a result, he's become this incredible individual. Where there's nobody quite like him in architecture. He's incredible.
But students, it's a way in. Like, we at Seymour Bell can employ you straight away. If you've got a skill, we can plug you in and you can start doing that. And then you become part of the team and you broaden out what you do. And it's a fantastic way to start a career, I think, rather than be too ambitious and try and be everything to everybody. I think that's quite hard.
I think that's the thing, stepping into working for consultancies in particular, is because it is really a business that if you have any experience, you can demonstrate that you have a particular skill. That's why I was always a fan. When we studied at Northumbria, they did a placement. So all the students would go out in their second.
We
and
take
third
Northumbria students.
Yeah, I know. You have always actually over the years, and and you do these placements in the second or third year, but you would come back and you would actually educate your peers. Everybody would share all these new skills that they've learned and elevate the entire course as a result. But as a result, you left university and you had 1 year of work experience, which you could demonstrate. It's such a tremendous. So always, I mean, like you say, it's like, specialize, get as much experience and as learning as you can. And that helps you to demonstrate, at least to get your foot in the door to get your first job. Once you get your first job, it's much easier.
And never lose your passion for what you're doing, and let yourself sink into, you've got to love design. Yeah. I think you've got to have your eyes open. You've got to be optimistic. You've got to look around at the world and see who's doing what and be excited. Yeah. When I was a student at the RCA, I remember we were inspired by a great designer called Sid Mead, who did all the design for Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and these wonderful drawings that were about the future, and absolutely amazing things that we found inspiring, and I'd look at Raymond Loewy trains and be inspired by that. And you'd look at, Sotsas typewriters and you'd be inspired by that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you must never stop being inspired.
And there's always somebody, a new person, somebody coming through that's like that. He does lots of things, but automotive design and spaceships and everything. But Daniel Simon, he's an incredible designer. If you look at his work, his drawing ability, he has a couple of amazing books out as well. But he's really inspiring. I guess that's the word as well, is curious. Just always be curious. So important. I think that's creativity is about curiosity. Right, we've got a tradition here where we ask 3 questions. So, what does good design mean to you? What is its role on a societal level? And how does it impact the everyday experience of the user?
Right.
So what does good design mean to you?
Good design is about making things better, as I've said. Better for people, users, better for business, better for the world. Those things are absolutely critical for me for good design. If it's not better, then it's not good enough. Yeah. I think it's not enough to just emulate things. I think you want to have to strive to make things better. And just taking things off in a different stylistic direction, like we used to say, that's wackiness masquerading as originality.
Yeah.
You know, just for the sake of it, there's no point doing it. I think you've got to be creating new all the time.
Yeah. And useful, I guess. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It has to be useful.
It has to be useful.
For me, it was
amazing.
Okay. Question number 2. Which designer, / business leader, past or present, has had the most significant influence on your perspective of design or business, and why?
Wow.
It can be multiple if you like.
Okay. First of all, I would say Ken Grange.
Absolutely.
When I grew up, I wanted to be Ken Grange. Right? I'm not hiding from that. I wanted to be Ken Grange. He had a successful business doing exciting things, of the kind of things that I wanted to do. So he was one of my heroes. Definitely Apple, Steve Jobs, Johnny Ive. You know, just from the culture of the business, the quality of the output, the caring about the smallest things, the obsession with detail. You know, I think that they, more than any other business, and the two of them together, like, changed my world. I mean, they changed the tools we worked with, apart from anything else. You know, was absolutely seminal. You know that. You people don't remember what it was like. We used to have to handwrite reports, you know, longhand, and someone would type them out, you know. And if you made a mistake on the typewriter, well, you know, you have to do it again, you know. So it's not like you can move sentences around. And then we started using them visually, and you know, they were absolutely critical, absolutely critical.
Yeah, we had Robert Bruner on the podcast.
Well, he was head of design there.
He was, He actually created the in-house design team, and then later employed Jonathan Ive. So
I know.
Johnny Ive. So amazing story. Yeah, and you're right. They have a profound effect, and they still do on our lives. Yeah. The products those amazing people have created. And okay, finally, third and final question. Love it. This is a tough one. Every time I think we're going to change this last question. It's a tough one, but I'll ask it anyway. Love it or hate it? What's a current macro trend you can't stop thinking about? And what do you think it says about the broader cultural landscape?
This is an easy one. AI.
Yeah. It's often a popular choice, actually. AI.
Yeah, because...
Tell me why.
You know what? You know, I think of AI as... I remember so clearly the first time I saw Photoshop rendering, right? Or the first time I used freehand, which was a precursor of Illustrator. Yeah. These were tools, right? These were a different kind of pencil. And AI, for me, is a different kind of tool, and magical tool, you know, that is... People are fearful of AI in the design business. I'm not fearful at all. I see it as a major opportunity. That there are... It opens the door to so much possibility that for me it's the latest Photoshop, the latest CAD tool that is just unbelievable. Yeah.
I mean, often people do cite AI because it is something that's on every.
It's going to change everything for us, unfortunately, in some bad ways. But for example, the most obvious immediate way is it can take 3 or 4 weeks out of a design program. Yeah, just in the kind of building of very complex 3D models, you know, and on screen, in order to get a visual, can now be done like that. You know, so that saves 2 or 3 weeks of hard work. You know? So
it's really powerful for iterative design, isn't it? Where you want to explore, go off on a tangent, explore different things to make sure your final choice is the right one. It's really powerful for doing this.
But it's like any powerful tool, you know, it needs an author. You know, the author, the designer, the person driving that is the most critical component. The people who become gods, as that expression I used before, at AI, will be the future for this business, because they will know how to author it and get the result that they want, rather than what the software is giving them, you know, the artificial intelligence is giving them, and use it as a tool to deliver what they feel is right.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been great fun.
I
could sit here and talk about design.
Honestly, and we will. We're going to go for lunch, and we're going to keep talking about design. So, I think we're incredibly fortunate to be in this career, and and all the young designers that will listen to our podcast. I think good luck. You're about to embark on a career, I think, which is, I can't imagine a better career, to be honest.
I can't imagine a better career.
I mean, where we get to work with clever people and invent the future and really do things for good, in a sense, like you said, making things better. It's not just for the environment, but also every single day, improving people's lives, sometimes just incrementally, but just making people feel better and improving, let's say, how we exist every single day.
The problem never goes away.
Yeah.
There's always going to be work for us to do, and what a career. I mean, we are so lucky, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I look at kids today and our children, and think what they're all doing and how did they end up, how did they get defined into those roles and jobs? It's we're lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, anybody who's thinking about a creative career, there's so many facets. That's why we have this podcast called Facets of Design, to show you, there are many avenues into creativity. And as you've seen from all our previous guests, how exciting and interesting their careers have been and their journey. And I think, sharing with Dick Powell today, his journey from, studying doing an art foundation and then going to Manchester and then going to the RCA, and how all of these elements have really built this repertoire of work, which has really had influence on us that we sometimes don't even realize, directly, indirectly. Maybe that kettle that you touch and pull off the base, that cordless kettle, or might be something on a motorbike, or in the future maybe in space travel, that Dick's had an amazing influence, and in many designers as well. These kind of books that have taught us to communicate and draw over the years, been very powerful. So we thank you for that. Thank you for all your contribution generally to design, but most of all, thank you so much for coming on our podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been super enjoyable. It's always great fun to talk to you, Paul, but it's wonderful to have this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Facets of Design from LIXIL Global Design. Please be sure to subscribe, share and follow us on Instagram at LIXIL Global Design. Stay tuned for more insightful conversations with innovators shaping the future of the creative industries.